Awesome. So I think Eric is going to be joining us a little bit later. He's going to just walk right up. But to begin building for Web3, what's next? Maybe we can do a round of intros and exactly what we're building. Want to start?
Hi, I'm Zaki. I'm working on a project called Sommelier Finance, which is a protocol for doing actively traded DeFi strategies that represent themselves as strategy tokens. So assets that you can buy that underlie the strategy. I also work on a lot of different blockchain protocols, and most notably, all my work is on Cosmos.
Hi, I'm Mustafa. I'm the co-founder of Celestia, which is a new modular blockchain network that allows you to very easily deploy your own blockchain.
My name is Kathleen.
Oh, no. I think we need some mic help for Kathleen, potentially. You can Google Kathleen. Cool, and I'm Joe. I'm a partner at A6Z Crypto. A lot of my focus prior to this was building in kind of all the Web2 peer-to-peer ecosystems. So I was at Uber, I was leading driver pricing there. I was at DoorDash, leading new verticals, and then was at Cameo, kind of leading consumer-side product. Great for you to join us, Eric. You want to give us an intro?
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Eric Wall. I'm a member of the Starknet Foundation, board member that was just announced today. Long-time Bitcoin community member, Ethereum community member. I'm an investor in the modular ecosystem, and overall like a blockchain researcher and investor.
Cool. Maybe to kick things off, we can talk about decentralization versus centralization. I feel like the elephant in the room that a lot of people are asking is what's going on with FTX and Binance, but maybe even expanding the aperture would be this idea that this isn't new, right? This idea that CeFi is sometimes obstructive or not as transparent about what they do. And ultimately, this isn't, we've seen this months ago with Celsius and Voyager. And so the bigger question is more, is there ever a good use case for centralization, or should crypto be synonymous with decentralization? Maybe, I don't know, Eric, do you want to start us off with that?
Well, I think there's not that many use cases that actually require the type of decentralization that we see in networks such as Bitcoin and Ethereum. I think that one use case that we understand that we need decentralization for is money. And beyond that, maybe finance, so decentralized exchanges, name services. But I don't think that we have to go so far and say, that ride-sharing apps or Tinder or stuff like that needs to be decentralized. There are a bunch of Web2 applications that need to be able to iterate quickly, and they function better in a centralized model. So it's the type of applications where you have catastrophic failures, where you lose all your money if something goes wrong. Those are the types of applications where you actually need decentralization.
Yeah, so the elephant in the room is that we sort of are experiencing something that feels like Mt. Gox 2.0, which is, a failure of a really well-known, extremely liquid, centralized exchange. And it does feel like a justification and a motivation for why we are trying to build this thing called DeFi. And why we think that, why it is interesting to build systems that basically cannot engage, where the kind of opaque risk-taking that apparently existed in FTX is impossible.
Yeah, I mean, the way I see decentralization is that I think base infrastructure and public goods should be decentralized, but people can build centralized kind of services on top of that optionally. It's just kind of like how the internet itself or the web itself is decentralized, but you can have centralized services on top of it. I think similar could apply to kind of, we also need decentralized digital money, but if people want to use centralized escrows, for example, or custodians, that's kind of up to them. And as long as as long as you have the option to be decentralized and not use a custodial wallet.
Yeah, I mean, unsurprisingly, I agree with a lot of what my co-panelists have said. I would add that in organizing companies and building strategies, you actually need a lot of the secrecy that a blockchain doesn't often afford you. Someone on a different panel that I was on last week mentioned that the Constitution DAO is a great example of something where you had decentralized decision making, and I said that was a terrible example. Basically, people bundled money, and then Ken Griffin said, "Oh, that's your bid," and then he went +1. So actually, there are we can talk about the halcyon fields where we can have decentralization to coordinate people all across the globe, but often where you need secrecy to be strategic, that's where I think centralized services, tend to prosper more. But I overwhelmingly agree that like public goods and things like this that are systematically important to financial systems online ought to have some sort of check, proof of reserves and at least some sort of transparency that blockchains offer you basically costlessly.
Awesome, yeah.
Can I ask one question?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to ask the other panelists, like, do you think that Twitter should be decentralized?
Why not? I don't think it needs to be on a blockchain, but I don't see why you can't have a peer-to-peer, email is decentralized in theory, email is peer-to-peer. So Twitter could be email-like, for example. It doesn't need to be a blockchain. You don't need consensus on the tweets, but it could. I think it should be decentralized, and it can be.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's this idea of are you basically, once you're on a platform, you're kind of stuck there with Twitter, right? Even if you have your identity, you have your followers, it's very difficult to actually then bring it over to another platform, even if another platform exists. So there are instances of Web3, Twitter, I think Farcaster is a really good example. It's an open layer blockchain with a social graph. It's more of an L1, right? And with a social graph, anyone can build on top of Farcaster and anyone can leave. And the beauty of it is, as a developer, once you build on Farcaster, maybe your front end is much better than the one that Farcaster built itself, and people migrate over, and I think that's great, right? There is no one stopping you from being able to build, and that the composability is what makes that really, really special.
I think a lot of the people who argue that Twitter should be decentralized in some form are doing so because they think it's a town square and that everyone should have a right to do X. I think Twitter is at this point, a private company that basically sells ads, right?
Yep.
And that's how they make revenue. And so, a lot of the sound criticisms of the sort of what Elon Musk has gotten himself into, I think boil back to he's arguing to do things that will make it less likely that advertisers will continue to advertise on Twitter. So that's kind of, I think, where the disconnect is.
Do you have any thoughts?
No, I was just going to say, ruminating on my answer that only money needs to be decentralized. I think that we also need a censorship-resistant town square. If the past couple of years has shown us anything, is that component is also something that's worthwhile decentralizing.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things too, right? I think content is another example. It's not just money. I think a lot of times whenever there's a peer-to-peer application, the question is always, why do you have a centralized entity in the middle taking a take rate? And I was at Uber. The question was always, what is Uber without the riders and drivers? But you had a third party, which were the shareholders of Uber, who ultimately were the ones making the decision of where that network was going. And so is there a world where, I think you mentioned maybe rideshare, a Web3 ride-sharing example isn't good. I think that's actually a really great example. And it was one of the earliest use cases. I think 2018, we've been talking about building the killer ETH application is decentralized ride sharing, but we still haven't built it. And maybe the better question I'd love to ask all of y'all is, what do you think is stopping us from vampire attacking kind of the Web2 consumer stack? Kathleen, maybe, or Eric, if you're ready.
Yeah, well, I just think that, it's true that you do get the benefit that if you're on a decentralized ride-sharing app, the rules can't just change under your feet, and that's great. But the other benefit that you need when you're developing this type of application is you need to be able to iterate quickly. If you have a decentralized application, now you want to launch version 2, you have to get every other node in the network to either you got to get users to migrate from the previous version to the new version. You need that type of iteration to stay competitive towards the competition. So I think there's a give and take here. So it's even though intuitively it makes sense that you want the rules to sort of stick there, you can't get that without also getting the slower innovation.
So just to build on what Eric was saying, I think about this a lot when teams come to me with when people come to me and they're oh, I want to build a decentralized X that isn't a money moving system. I mean, it's why do we build decentralized money moving systems? Well, if you build centralized money moving systems, you need licenses or you go to jail. It's a huge reason to build decentralized. And so you are willing to interact with this incredibly difficult to use software development lifecycle, where iteration is incredibly slow, where every time you want to make a change and evolve the product, you have to get into a massive governance debate, that there's politics with everything. And nobody in general is super happy about that. But if the alternative to building such a system is that you're either building something that is fragile and going to lose everyone's money, or you're going to go to jail for operating it, or all these other reasons, then you like bear that pain. And the question is like, would someone bear that pain to build Uber, or would someone bear that pain to build a decentralized Twitter? And that's less clear to me. And then the question then becomes, can we bring down that pain? And like the reality is we're still very, very early in trying to like build mechanisms of developing decentralized software that are like not so painful to build.
Yeah, and I think part of it is that it's just really hard to build decentralized systems that scale technically and also that have good UX. Like if you look at like the history of email, like email started out extremely kind of distributed. There was lots of email providers, but now, like if you're on Google, Microsoft, or Apple, it's very difficult to start your own mail server and not have your emails rejected as spam. And that's because email kind of has a very bad UX. Because without that, email would have a very, very bad UX because you would get a spam all the time. So I think that's also part of the reason. Like protocols tend towards centralization because of UX issues and scale issues.
My initial reaction to that is essentially that like the other thing that Uber provides you is not just between drivers and passengers, it's also with insurers, right? So like the difference between me calling up someone that I, vaguely know in a city and met once, or some, a number that I see in the bathroom wall or something, and saying, hey, can you give me a lift, is that I think there's a semblance of a chance that I might be safer with someone who is being brokered through a third party. And I guess that's one big benefit in sort of 1.0 version. But I think the point of cryptocurrencies essentially are to lower transaction costs for complex transactions that are meant to be with someone you don't necessarily have to trust. And so that encompasses a lot of our sort of modern world, and I think certainly that potentially could be something with ride sharing. Who am I to say no? But I think that layer of like insurance and like the sort of enforcement of that is pretty important.
Yeah, no, I mean it's kind of funny because like when you think about what is truly peer-to-peer ride sharing, it was like Craigslist. You post on Craigslist, I want a ride, and then someone else says, I can give you a ride, and that's Web 1. And the reason why we went kind of backwards, we allowed a central entity to like take a commission in between that brokering that transaction is because there's trust involved. And maybe this is kind of like a good leeway to talk about how do we think about building reputation and trust in Web3. I think a lot of the questions a lot of people have is, well, like in a normal, functioning ecosystem, like let's say I go to the flea market, I am someone who like, is malicious, I'm haggling and then I shortchange the merchant, they remember me and they'll make sure they'll never do business with me again. And I think one of the things that has kind of been a problem in crypto is this idea that people can be malicious, pull the rug, and spin up either a new wallet very easily or switch up identities very easily. So would love to hear everyone's thoughts generally on how you think about building for privacy as well as some sort of overarching reputation that is portable across different ecosystems, and that actually is like kind of a credit score, regardless of which ecosystem you're in.
I mean, we build these type of systems assuming that we don't know who people are, right? That's why we build over-collateralized most of the time we're supposed to build over-collateralized applications.
Yep.
We don't do that all the time, but we're supposed to.
Yeah.
We don't have an effective identity system on blockchains, and I don't think that we want one. Yeah, of course, you can build gated ecosystems where you do permission identity, but that's not like the ethos of cryptocurrency. You want anyone to be able to be a fridge or a dog, and you're not supposed to be gatekept based on who you are. And if you're not going to have identity, then you can't really have the same type of trust-based systems that we have in the regular world where you remember people's faces.
And I would add that there's also even when you aren't just switching wallets thereafter, there have been big frauds that have been committed by people multiple times, and there's been very little reputational hit in this ecosystem, right? So even when the entity is known, it's just business as usual, kind of.
Yeah, and it feels kind of ridiculous to say you know who someone is, and it's the confidence scam, right? You play repeated games with someone, and each time they reciprocate until they don't, and then you find out that there's a $6 billion hole in FTX, and the whole industry is collapsing.
Yeah, I think the question wasn't so much should we KYC everyone. I think it's more of a question of we do have the technology to be I think zero knowledge proofs is a good example of you being able to do something anonymously while being able to prove that you are the person who's supposed to do that transaction. But that's just one application of that. I think maybe Celestia, I don't know, Mustafa, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of boils down to Sybil resistance. Like, how do you create reputation systems that are Sybil resistant? And also, like, this problem, like Web 2 also hasn't solved this problem. Like, before social media networks were a thing, people, like a lot of people were thinking like, social media networks are even possible, because how the hell would they even prevent bots from signing up? Like, what if I just create a script that makes 1 million accounts? And like, you would think they would solve that problem by now, but they haven't. Like, Twitter has a huge bot problem, email has a huge spam problem, you know, and Facebook and so on. So Web 2 also hasn't solved this problem either. So yeah, it's questions like how do we do like privacy preserving kind of reputation systems and Sybil resistance? Ideally, yeah, we don't want to just KYC everybody. We don't want just some centralized entity to KYC everybody. And I don't really think right now there's no perfect solution right now. Like ideally, there's like what's called proof of humanity systems where you can prove like someone is a unique individual, but the UX for that is extremely bad. But there's some middle ground systems like Bitcoin Passport that let you like authenticate yourself with various things like Google and stuff like that. Yeah.
There was something we did at the DevCon conference in Bogota where the ENS founders had like a system for printing out your ENS name on a badge, and people went around with their cell phones and they scanned other people at the conference. They scanned their ENS names, and if you were there, you know that you scanned a bunch of people. And then you can see who they scanned, and you can see who those people scanned. So they were basically building a type of web of trust for ENS identities on that conference. So that could be one way to sort of build an ecosystem of individuals where, so it goes back to this old concept of web of trust that comes from like the 80s or something.
Yeah, like I vouch for you, and therefore some of my reputation is hit if I vouch for someone who then is malicious.
Exactly.
I think that there are, for people who are very Web3 native, there are a bunch of like crypto social reputational holes in the ecosystem right now that like we feel very like constantly. Like interacting with governance is like super awkward. It would be nice to be able to be like, I'm going to create a new pseudonym, but like show some connection to like my real name's reputation and identity. Being able to like release software in a way that's like connected to also my activities on chain. Like all of these things are like, there are like real missing crypto social sort of layers that are missing. And I suspect like those get solved for Web3 natives first, and then like any sort of like financial reputation system gets solved.
So is the question that we need to build a standard for something like this, some sort of like reputation score that persists?
Yeah, I mean like sign in with Ethereum is starting to become a standard. Like in Web 2, like people tried really hard to do this thing called OpenID. It's like you know how like right now you have like login with Facebook, login with Google, but these are centralized companies. Back in the day, people used to try to. There was this thing called OpenID, which is like a decentralized version of Facebook, like login with Facebook and login with Google, but it never really took off. But surprisingly, logging in with Ethereum has actually took off. Like you log into NFT or DeFi apps using MetaMask with your Ethereum address. And so like ideally, if you can kind of like tie in some kind of like some form of Sybil resistance or reputation system with like your ETH address or your like whatever blockchain address, then that could be like one path forward. And that's what Bitcoin Passport is trying to do. You can connect certain things about your identity to your Ethereum address. Like you can connect like for example, you can prove that you have a Twitter account and connect it to your Ethereum address, for example.
Awesome. I think maybe shifting gears here, we have a lot of L1s on the panel. Would love to hear your guys' thoughts on how we think about the world in crypto moving from monolith to modular and vice versa. So when we think about like monolithic, chains or like, Ethereum is a good example, but more and more we're seeing app-specific L1s like DYDX. Generally, how do you guys think about kind of this dichotomy of monolithic versus modular? Maybe Celestia, maybe Mustafa?
Yeah, I mean, the way that we look at it is like Web3 is following a similar evolution to Web2. Before like virtual machines and the cloud was really popularized, the main ways that you would deploy a website was either you like use a shared web hosting service like GeoCities or Bluehost, and you have to use whatever like programming languages or execution environment they have. So back in the day, like it was just like PHP or MySQL. You were very limited to what you could do, or you had to physically deploy your own server. And And then if you wanted flexibility, you would have to physically deploy your own server. But then the cloud came along, and then it kind of gave you the best of both worlds because it allowed you to have the deploy your own virtual server, but without the overhead of having to actually deploy or maintain a physical server. And so there's kind of like a similar transition happening in Web3. Like when Ethereum was popularized, it was like, okay, everyone just deploys their application on the same chain, and everyone has to use the EVM, and all applications run on the same blockchain on the same computer. But now we're seeing like a multi-chain ecosystem where each there's many different chains. So like there's many different Cosmos chains, and also in Ethereum, each rollup is a chain. And so if we use rollup technology, for example, we can make it possible to deploy your own chain without the benefits, without the usual overheads that come with deploying your own chain. Because with rollups, you don't have to maintain your own validator set, similar to how if you use a virtual machine in the cloud, you don't have to maintain physical hardware. And so that's kind of what the modular thesis is about. It's basically decoupling the layer 1 consensus from execution. People can now define their own execution environments in the form of their own blockchain, instead of being tied to one specific execution environment.
Kathleen, how does Tezos think about modularity versus monolith?
So I guess just a quick primer. Tezos is a layer 1 cryptocurrency. It was born out of the observation that Bitcoin lacks an elegant formal forum for upgrading itself. And so basically we have governance as part of the protocol. It's upgraded 11 times, it's on its 12th. And the idea is to basically take things that work really well. We've stolen, because weird artists steal, a little bit from Cosmos, for example, in designing consensus algorithms. And the idea is to basically anticipate needs that a layer 1 might need, and to basically have a mechanism where token holders can propose and ratify and instantiate upgrades to the protocol seamlessly. It's worked well so far, but yeah, basically we focus more on making all the features go in at the layer 1, as opposed to incentivizing and promoting the creation of new chains. The reason, going back to 2013 when the idea was conceived of, in 2013, if you had like a new consensus algorithm or something like this, you'd create a new token wholesale, and the observation we had was like, hey, you have to bootstrap all these network effects in order for that new token to take hold and for people to really benefit from that. Wouldn't it be better and arguably easier if there was some sort of mechanism for proposing and instantiating that into the protocol itself? So that's how we got the governance model that we have.
The main thing that I think is so we have experienced as an industry like the sense in which like a given L1 feels like one unified thing, right? Like when you're interacting with the Ethereum ecosystem, you use one wallet. That wallet like takes you across multiple applications. You use one block explorer, Etherscan, to like understand what's going on. And the real question has been, if as you try to go towards this like application-specific blockchain future, if that is an interesting future, can you still have this sort of crypto-native experience of, oh, it all feels like one ecosystem? I think the Cosmos ecosystem has made a huge amount of strides towards that, towards feeling like it's one ecosystem, even though it's many different application-specific chains, but it's still very early days. And I think that's like a huge thing that has to happen for like things like Celestia to succeed.
I think it's a great thing that we have Zaki on this panel, because I think that he's extremely insightful when it comes to this. And I want to ask a couple of questions to Zaki, if that's okay. So I think, so one of the largest ZK rollups that we had on Ethereum, DYDX, spun out from being a ZK rollup, or is spinning out to become a Cosmos chain. At the same time, in the Cosmos ecosystem, there's sort of chatter around maybe these application-specific blockchains in the Cosmos ecosystem should leverage something like Celestia as a data availability system, which sort of turns them into rollups. So you have DYDX becoming an application-specific blockchain instead of a rollup, but application-specific blockchains are becoming rollups. It feels like there's a circle going on here. Do you have any insights here? Like, what's going on here?
So I would say the first thing is, DYDX was trying to solve a very particular problem, and they were trying to find a tool chain a set of tools that existed within the blockchain ecosystem for solving their problem. And basically what they wanted to do was get rid of their centralized order book. That was their most important thing. And so you can build an architecture with Cosmos where like literally your order book moves what country it is in, every 2 or 3 seconds, which is a completely crazy idea for people who have built, conventional exchanges. The idea that your order book might essentially be traveling around the world, and that's a really cool thing that you can build out of the Cosmos architecture. But like the Cosmos architecture, in theory, is not the only way to build this. There could have been an L2 architecture on top of Ethereum or Celestia that could have enabled this. It just doesn't exist yet. And so, but so when the Cosmos ecosystem is going really well. But I think a lot of us, when we look beyond 100 blockchains and into the thousands, tens of thousands of blockchains, we do see sort of a lot of sort of architectural incongruity, sort of friction with this model at the higher end of scale, which we think we are making progress and heading towards. And so that's why things like Celestia are very interesting to me, because it posits an architecture that could sort of go to that next level of scale in a way that we don't think we can get with our current.
I have one more question for Zaki, if that's okay. So a while ago, I was trying to understand how can cross rollup systems, and this is a question for you guys also, how can cross rollup systems communicate with each other or bridge with each other effectively? And I think I had a conversation with Georgios Konstantinopoulos from Paradigm, and he said that you guys have been looking at cross rollup bridges that would be trustless in some way, or almost like atomic. So what's the future for cross rollup interaction? Is it IBC, or is it something that will leverage the mutual data availability layer? Will we see more? Because the big problem here is that when we're building application-specific blockchains and rollups, the composability breaks. Is there some light at the end of the tunnel where these systems are going to become better at interacting with each other than what we currently have, or is IBC the best that we're gonna see?
Yeah, I guess to kind of give you some context. Generally, there's kind of 2 types of bridges in the blockchain ecosystem. There's what I would describe as a trust minimized bridge and a committee-based bridge. A committee-based bridge is what IBC uses right now, and what has existed between rollups, like the bridge between Ethereum and Polygon. And those bridges basically rely on a committee to assign messages in the bridge, and you have to trust that committee. If that committee misbehaves, they can steal funds. But rollups introduce a new type of bridge, which I describe as a trust minimized bridge. Instead of trusting a committee to tell you the messages between in the bridges is correct, you instead use proving-based systems like ZK proofs or fraud proofs that prove that the state of the destination and source chain is correct. So you don't have to trust a committee anymore. You just have to trust math, basically, or a cryptographic proof. But right now, IBC uses a committee-based bridge, and that's why, if you want to scale Cosmos to millions of chains, we can't assume that there will be a million secure committees. It's very unlikely, and that's why at Celestia we're trying to make it possible to deploy a Cosmos chain using rollups, so that the Cosmos chains, we want to add fraud proofs and ZK proofs to IBC, so you can have fraud provable IBC, so that rollups can communicate with each other without using committee-based assumption. And so you don't have to assume that if there's a million rollups, you don't have to assume that all of them have a secure committee, effectively. Yeah.
Sorry, Joe, for stealing your role here, but I have to ask some more questions about this. So, our good friend...
To be fair, I think we're getting called off the stage.
Yeah.
I think we end on the 40. Maybe you can do one.
8 minutes.
We have 8 minutes. Okay, cool. Yeah, go.
Yes. So our good friend James Prestwich of Nomad built a fraud provable bridge system, and I think it's just we're getting kind of demoralized with all of these bridge hacks. Can we really build more complex bridge systems in blockchains than multi-sig bridges?
Yeah. But I mean, all of these hacks. All of these hacks were as a result of a kind of a coding error in the in the bridge rather than the design of the bridge itself. Like it was always due to some stupid coding error, like rather than the fact whether they were multi-sig bridges or not. But I think like all kinds of bridges, like bridges are really scary, like they're extremely scary, and people underestimate how scary they are. I think ultimately we need more trust minimized bridges. Also don't fix the hack that's Nomad had, or wormhole hack, because that was like a hack in the actual smart contract, not in the fundamental design of the bridge. It's fundamentally a question of how do we, maybe we need some fallback mechanisms to how we need more. We just need to think about how to first of all create secure smart contracts, but also to kind of deal with cases where the smart contract fails. Like maybe there's a way to we can shut down, someone can shut down the bridge immediately or something like that. That we should prioritize safety over liveness, in the sense we should prioritize the safety of the bridge over the uptime of the bridge. If anything goes wrong, the bridge should be immediately shut down. So if we can prioritize safety over liveness, maybe there's ways to kind of make them less scary.
So I'll just make two comments.
Yeah.
So one comment is on the bridge security question, and I think the bridges are probably one of the things that I think benefits the most from having standards, like having a standards-oriented bridge, which is what IBC tries to do. I will say that there is a challenge of doing that, which is that if you build a standards-oriented bridge, there's no obvious way to monetize it, and so you have. This has been, so Cosmos sort of steel-manned the unmonetizable standards-oriented bridge design as an ecosystem and have been trying to figure it out ever since. But it's one of the reasons I think the bridge ecosystem struggles, because they're people don't build standards. They're building, they build very quickly. They're all in competition for market share with each other. The bridging fees are actually a very valuable thing, and people are after this. And then bridge MEV is going to be an even more valuable thing, so people are very interested in that. And then to kind of go back to one of the questions of whether or not IBC is sort of the last word in interoperability, I actually do think IBC is a way for two blockchains to sort of understand each other. They understand each other's consensus algorithm, they understand each other's internal state, they can read and write to that state from each other. But we are also seeing this world in which sort of block proposers can potentially propose common block, in a common way across multiple blockchains. And this is sort of a significant frontier in interop that you can sort of explore in both the Cosmos ecosystem. We have a project called Typhon, which is a Tendermint, multiple Tendermint chains making blocks together. And then we also have this idea of a shared data availability layer and shared sequencers being able to propose blocks together. All of these things are important infrastructural pieces to make the app chain world truly competitive across all possible metrics with the monolithic world.
Awesome. Maybe we can do a quick round robin on what are some of the cross-sector ideas that you're most excited about, maybe the intersection of crypto and AI, or crypto and biology. Maybe we can go, Kathleen, I don't know if there's anything that's exciting to you.
I think finance is first and foremost the most exciting thing, and I've been overwhelmingly disappointed with a lot of the efforts in DeFi because they've been sort of circular almost. Yeah. Finance is a tool for financing other activities, not the activity of DeFi, so I look forward to seeing more efforts towards taking hard assets and trying to put them on chain in some form. Tezos ecosystem does that with STOs quite a bit. It'd be nice to see people actually kind of going towards and pushing the envelope a little bit. A lot of what you see, unfortunately, is rehashes of common themes over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I'm personally very interested in the idea of decentralized autonomous organizations in general. I want to see more experiments in DAOs. And especially DAOs, because DAOs are effectively a way to kind of create your own jurisdiction in a way, create your own jurisdiction with its own rules without having those rules enforced by a court. So I think I want to see DAOs on their own chains and more experimentation around that.
I think that so obviously I have a tremendous interest in DeFi, which is why I'm, Sommelier is one of my main projects. But I honestly have been starting to feel intrigued by this like whole intersection of AI and DAOs, because like the whole scale and runway, like stable diffusion sort of joint IP thing, like seems like it's starting to rhyme with like DAOs without meaning to, and it seems like there might be something to explore there.
Yeah, if I have like one cringe Web3 idea of something that I really want to happen, it's content creators merging with DAOs. I actually think that could be something that could be huge. So you can have Twitch streamers, OnlyFans models, TikTokers, Instagram models, like all these icons that attract huge amount of eyeballs and attention and personality cults around them. That is, for me, a great setting for a decentralized autonomous organization where you can have specific goals that the DAO wants to achieve. So you can have one model, for example, that wants to get plastic out of the ocean, and now you have a community there, and participation to the community is sort of gated by an NFT. As people swap these NFTs, you can have a treasury that generates revenue, and you can sort of build an organization that sets out to solve specific tasks.
So it's kind of like unionizing creative types on the internet, or?
Sure.
I'm trying to think of the tagline.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think the question always there is like, what does the tokenomics look like, so that you're always sure the people that are part of that are the individuals who are like the real fans, right? As opposed to just speculators who are buying into the organization.
I just think that we've tried really hard to create communities in the Web3 space, and people make communities based on, I have a picture of a digital monkey as my profile picture, and so do you, and now we're friends. But I think that in the creator economy, there are like already pre-existing communities that like each other because they like the same artists, they like the same type of things. So
like
those,
Pleaser DAO.
Pleaser DAO, didn't they just buy a bunch of like art? Well, they had an interest in NFTs, I suppose.
Well, the artist herself is the one that actually does a lot of the artwork.
Right. But didn't they also buy like a bunch of other
also,
artwork?
Yeah.
So anyway, so creator tokens. I think it's a shame that BitCloud probably set the creator token economy back like 5 years. It's going to take a while before people can get excited about like having a token that sort of represents the value in the content that's being put out by a specific creator.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of like interesting things. I think like Co-Create is a good example of like someone or like I guess a project that's kind of going in that space. So we're kind of coming up on time. Maybe we can just close out on where we think, any predictions for the future, where we think, kind of closing out on building for the future of Web3. Yeah, where do you think it's going?
Proof of reserves, please, for the love of God. We cannot have another situation like FTX. Not again. It's too many times. We've had this problem too many times. We need to either use DeFi, or if we use centralized exchanges, let's leave them if they don't publish any records of what their on-chain wallets look like.
Yeah, I mean, I the only thing I can say is it does feel like a remotivating moment. I think a lot of the narratives in the investor community had like shifted against DeFi in the last 6 months or so to like GameFi and gaming and all this other stuff. And this is a reminder of that like we still just like don't have the core infrastructure of blockchains in terms of price discovery and everything working in a trustworthy manner yet.
For the past 10 years, we've been stuck in this loop, which I call the monolithic blockchain loop, where people keep launching new layer 1 blockchains that promise to solve the problems of the previous generation of blockchains. Like now we have Aptos Azuri, the last generation we have Solana, Near. You have like tens every new generation, and that's not sustainable. So I'm hoping that the modular blockchain philosophy will help us break free from that loop.
I think in order for NL1 to be extremely useful in like kind of the newfound popularity that the space had, maybe it doesn't have it anymore, but maybe it'll have it again. Scaling is the next big problem for the ecosystem to solve, so that we don't need to have this patchwork that has proven to be a source of vulnerability and reputation burning.
Yeah, I'll close this out. I feel like we've seen this in history. When you have an entity that rules unilaterally, I think we're in London, so I can use this example. Or like King James II, like in 1688, he was I think he was overtaken by the parliament because he was just making laws on his own. He was like forcing the citizens to participate in lending in very low interest rates to the crown. And ultimately, if we look at what's going on today, like anything that's kind of like a centralized entity, so some of like the big tech players of today, they're kind of like digital versions of King James II, because over time they have built network effects, and ultimately there was this idea of subsumption risk, right? I think Apple's a really good example of this, where they can, once you have developers locked in, they can change the terms and services and change up their commission rates, and you're kind of just left holding the bag, like, I guess I have to stick here. I think Amazon is another good example where they generally do compete with the merchants who build on top of their ecosystem. When they see the ledger and the data of which widgets are the most profitable, then they spin up their own, call it like Amazon Basics line. It's like a white label line that then they basically build against the people who build on top of them. And so what we kind of go full circle of like, why does decentralization matter outside of finance? Like even for content, for e-commerce, I think there's always this idea of like portability and composability, I think is really, really important. And so for us, I hope, you know, there are builders in the crowd who have been inspired from the panelists in our discussion today. At A16Z we actually have startup school that we're launching, so it's going to be like a Web3 accelerator starting next March. Applications are due this November, and it's going to be 3 months long, so hopefully we'll see a lot of you guys applying. And that kind of wraps it up here. Thank you all for coming, and maybe we can do a round of applause for our panelists today.